And welcome back to the Luke Deckard Show. I'm your host, Luke Deckard. How's it going? I hope everyone is having a good Saturday night. I am. It's been good. What have I done? What have I done today? Done a lot of Star Trek thinking. Thought a lot about Star Trek. I rewatched episodes 3 and 4 of Star Trek Picard because, I'm talking about it tonight. So I thought I would revisit it. I think I've watched both episodes a couple of times, and yeah, what else did I do? I also watched the new Luther film on Netflix, and I'm not going to talk about it now because I might talk about it later. Maybe we will see, but yeah, not talking about it right now. But what I will say in general, that Luther film is pretty terrible. And it's a shame because I really love the series. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the BBC series starring Idris Elba. Ran for 5 seasons on the BBC, and Netflix, I guess, somehow got a hold of it, and it's to the point to where when Netflix gets their hands on a property, I sort of cringe, and I'm like, I wish Netflix didn't have their hands on something. It's there's very few Netflix things that I'm enjoying these days, and they seem to have not done a very good job with Luther, which is disappointing. Disappointing. But I'm not here to talk about Luther, even though that's very difficult because boy oh boy, boy oh boy, do I want to. Do I want to? Yeah, no. Tonight we're talking about Star Trek Picard. It's all about Star Trek Picard episodes 3 and 4 of the current season. Um if you've been watching them, I would love to know what you think. Are you loving it? Are you hating it? Personally, if you saw my previous discussion on the season, I've thoroughly enjoyed the first 2 episodes. I thought they were great. Little nitpicks here and there, but my nitpicks I think are they're quite small. There's nothing massive that I would change. I think what I took away from the first couple of episodes was that yeah, this is a very good return to form for Star Trek. I feel like I am, for the first time since I guess Nemesis, seeing Picard and Riker and Worf and returning to these characters who have been not really themselves in the first couple of seasons, to say the least. I think it's safe to say that seasons 1 and 2 of Picard are sort of, yeah, 7 of 9, Jean Luc, the glimpse of Riker and Troy. And not really. They don't feel authentically like themselves. They feel like uneven and someone else's sort of idea of what these people should be, as opposed to the writers and the previous showrunners understanding them. But I won't harp on about that because I talked a lot about that in my previous chat about Picard. So I don't know, you can go back and watch that if you want. But if you don't want to, I don't really give a shit. Oh, I mean, crap. I guess you can't cuss on Netflix, or not Netflix, YouTube. Have I gone? Okay, I've gone deep enough into the video that I won't get penalized by YouTube for cursing, but I'll try to keep it clean. So, Picard season 3, episode 3. I have pictures. I want to bring up pictures. The cliffhanger was very good with the end of episode 2. The end of episode 2, we get some big reveals. There's a exciting fight between the Titan and this new ship called the Shrike. It all boils down to, in episode 2, it all boils down to Picard learns that Jack Crusher is actually his son. and that the Vatic, the big evil lady who's the captain of the Shrike, wants him. But once Picard learns that it is his son, he refuses to hand him over, and and uh, and as a result, convinces Captain Shaw to go head to head with the Shrike. And so they fire at each other and disappear into the nebula. There's no denying, I think, that these first four episodes very clearly riff strongly off of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, a little bit of Search for Spock, and also a little bit of The Undiscovered Country. The big thing is probably more Khan than anything else. Though the motivation behind this season is more rooted in the search for Spock, in that Picard and Riker commandeer a vessel to go help their friend Beverly, who's in trouble, which is very similar to Kirk and all them commandeering the Enterprise to go save Spock's corpse. Well, they save Spock's conscious because Spock's alive, his body's on Genesis. But very quickly this becomes more like the Wrath of Khan, in where the Reliant and the Enterprise are fighting and hunting each other through a nebula that is messing with their sensors and things like that. So it's very kind of difficult to see and know where your enemies are. And that's essentially what happens. Now, there's been some big reveals, and there was something that I noticed, and this was the first hint of this big reveal. But I'll talk about it in a little bit. But there was something I noticed in episode 2 and into 3. Vatic is smoking a cigarette of some kind. This dark, blackish brownish papered cigarette, that's, or almost like a cigar, I guess, that it reminded me of Star Trek 6. It reminded me of this lady at the top, who I can't remember her name now, but she helped Kirk and McCoy break out of the Klingon gulag that they were in. But she was also a shapeshifter. And so it was interesting that Vatic was smoking a cigarette that I thought, it's very similar to that. And I wonder, is there a connection, or isn't there? Turns out there just may be a connection. And I mean, I guess spoilers all the way through this, because I might as well talk about it. But yes, it does seem that the Klingons, the changelings are back. And I've always sort of, and it appears that Vatic might be a changeling. But I have some thoughts on that, but I'll get to that a bit later. But I always thought, after watching Deep Space Nine, which came out after Star Trek 6, I always sort of wondered, was this lady part of the same, the link? Was she a changeling, or wasn't she a changeling? I like to tell myself that she was, and I think, given this Easter egg of smoking these cigarettes, Mike, I feel like that might be what Terry Metalis and all them are winking at, that yes, the lady from Star Trek 6 is probably a changeling who was in the link, found her way out of the through the wormhole or whatever into our sector, into Klingon space, and got herself arrested somehow. So yeah, that was a cool thing. That was something I noticed in episode 2, but didn't quite land on the connection until episode 3. But yes, so okay, I'll come down in a second. So what is pretty cool about, actually I'll go to it now. What is pretty cool about this season of Picard is I am enjoying. I want to talk about the crew. We haven't had a lot of exposure to the crew yet. We've had little bits sprinkled through, and I'm enjoying them a lot. I really think the character of Tavine, the Vulcan, a science officer, is she's really fascinating, and I hope that we get more of her. I think that there is something to that character that could be worth exploring, because it's as you can see, I've got this other picture of Lieutenant Ilea from the motion picture, who's Delton. Now, it's not been mentioned in the show yet, but I've seen in interviews where it's speculated that Tavine might be half Delton, half Vulcan, half Delton, and so I'm fascinated in that. I think that would be a really interesting kind of duality to explore, in that, you had it with Spock. He was half human, half Vulcan, which is interesting, but we've not seen a half Vulcan, half Delton before. And Deltons are, very different to humans. So I think I would love to see more of that. I don't know if we will get much more in season 3, but my big hope, genuinely, is that I would love to see a spin-off series featuring the crew of the Titan. I think that is, if that doesn't happen, um, I think Paramount have made the biggest mistakes of their lives, and especially coming off the fact that Picard is coming to an end and Discovery is coming to an end, and everyone seems to be taking to Picard season 3, even people who have not enjoyed seasons 1 and 2, or even enjoyed Discovery, or on the fence on Strange New Worlds. Picard season 3 is this unique, this unique Star Trek show that is kind of broken through, and in some ways brought, not everyone, but has brought a lot of people together, and returned to sort of love for Trek, and also returned to, on a writing point, return to writing that is more Star Trek esque. And one of the things I've kind of, back to the crew, is the conversations and the way the crew are interacting on the bridge is very Star Trekky. You know, you have Tavine, who is, she's asked a question, she responds, and you have Sydney LaForge, who is also, responding, and then you have the Bajoran guy who's opposite her. The way they're interacting is all, there's no sort of that, what I call like Gilmore Girls rapid fire witty sarcastic dialogue. There's no sort of Marvel-esque, we need to be, cracking jokes while there's a deadly situation happening around us. Everything is the crew are taking the situation quite seriously, which is something I love. There's plenty of room for levity in Star Trek, and there's I mean, you can watch almost any episode of the old stuff, and you will find several moments of levity and comedy. But I've always hated when I'm seeing this sort of repartee, between characters while the ship is, being blown up around them. That's never sat well with me, and I like that. So far, we're 4 episodes in, and the crew are taking things serious. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Tavine, and I want to see more. I want to see more of this character. I want to see what can they do. Sitting in the Forge again is another really cool one. It's her character is interesting because she's not. She kind of sees herself as almost like a nepotism baby. She's like, oh, of course, I'm Geordie LaForge's daughter. They had to let me in. They had to let me into Starfleet. But she's trying to pave her own way. She's not following a path that her dad necessarily maybe kind of wanted her to, or following in his footsteps. Totally, obviously, in Next Generation, where she is sat is exactly where Geordie was sat in the first season, and then that changed. I think it was season 2, when he took over engineering. So I like that about her, that she is in a way, kind of insecure about her place in this on this ship in this universe, but is doing her best to just crack on. Um, so yeah, she's someone again who I'm like, there's more to this character, and I hope we get it. I think we probably will. I think given that Jordy is coming in and we're going to meet her other sister whose name I now cannot remember. Sydney, and if someone in the chat remembers, just tell me the name of LaForge's other daughter who I can't remember. Um yeah, so we probably will get a little bit more of that because of that dynamic. But I do feel that maybe some of the other supporting bridge crew, as the season progresses and as we possibly spend more time with the legacy characters, we might not go as deep. But again, what is being set up with this crew is you know Captain Shaw is one of the best new captains that I think he is the best new captain we've had since. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Archer in Enterprise. I think I never really connected with him. He was a bit too he was a bit too kind of standoffish. I hated that he had his little private dinners and not everyone was invited. I get what they were doing with that, but he just felt a little that was a bit too snobby for me, I guess. But also just generally the way he acted was a bit too goofy. And Enterprise, Star Trek Enterprise was a show that I mean, I'll hold my hand up. I'm one of the people who tuned out, and was partly also responsible for that show not getting a lot of seasons because I was like, nah, this is not fun. This is not fun. But yeah, so I would say since Janeway, there's really not a captain who I haven't loved. Kirk is great. Picard is great. Cisco's probably my favorite. I love Janeway, but Shaw is a terrific new captain. He's conflicted in a way that is very similar to Cisco, which we'll get into in a bit. But he's also there's a bit of there's a bit of an action man to him, and a bit of kind of no nonsense. He's a weird sort of mesh of like I guess Cisco, Riker, and Picard. I kind of somehow someone threw them together, and this would be the someone did a Tuvix situation. Shaw would be the product of these three being melded together in a transporter accident, maybe. So yeah, I want to see more of this crew. If we don't get a spin-off series, I will be very, very, very disappointed. Very disappointed. Let's Yeah, so that's that. What's next? Okay, yeah, we'll come to that in a second. Yeah, so again, like I said, the dialogue I think is much better. I'm so glad that 'cause I think it was in Strange New Worlds. There was this moment where Uhura was on the ship on the bridge and sitting at her station, and she said something like kind of annoying. It was something along the line that was like, "Oh, that's so effing cool," or oh, something like that. That I just it pulled me out of the moment, and I think there's a lot of bits of dialogue in both Discovery and Strange New Worlds that aren't it's not dialogue that the character should be saying. It's the writers thinking this is what the audience should be saying, so we're going to have the audience say it, and it's a bit pandery. And that's what's not happening in Picard season 3, which I'm like, hey, it's nice as a viewer to have that sort of I think respect. I think you don't want to talk down to your audience. There's nothing worse than your stories talking down to your reader or your watcher or your listener. I've been in situations where that's been the note, like, oh, we need to really spell it out. Do we or can we trust, oh, I don't think people will know this word. Well, they can have a dictionary and they can look it up. So I'm very sort of, uh, you know, don't talk down. Give people a new word. Give people something to think about. let the audience get that reaction of, oh god, that is so effing cool, as opposed to the characters needing to say it. So yeah, so let's talk Picard and Beverly. So episode 3 is titled 17 seconds. 17 seconds. And the episode begins with obviously there's a bit of a battle with the Shrike and the Titan, and they are able to get away for a little bit, make some distance and hide, and there's a bit of a calm. Each episode is doing something kind of interesting, and in that they are going back in time and showing us something from the past, and it somehow becomes relevant in the course of this story. And in this particular episode's case, there is a flashback to Riker and Picard having a drink together right after the birth of his son, and Riker tells him how, there was some drama on the ship. I think it was the Titan. He was on the Titan at that time. Drama on the ship, and Troy was in labor, and the doctor was like, "You need to get to sickbay ASAP." And the journey to the sickbay from the bridge to sickbay takes 17 seconds. So Riker's whole thing is that while he was on that journey, and there was this threat of something harmful happening to his newborn son and to his wife, that was a very, very long journey for him, and that's kind of set up in that moment. And all of the fourth episode does the same thing with another thing. So there's these sort of flashbacks that are tied into things. And I guess episode 2 did it. We had a not a deep flashback, but a little flashback of what's his face, Jack, and that kind of teed up the Shrike finding them. So Beverly and Picard finally meet up. We see them two on the bridge of the Titan at the end of episode 2, where they don't speak. They just look at each other, and that's when the penny drops for Picard. Well, the penny doesn't drop. He's just been. It's when he accepts the fact that Jack is his son. And so now in sickbay, they have their first heart to heart, and the scene is a very interesting scene. I would go so far as to say it's a quite moving scene, and the way it's shot is brilliant, because you can see in this, if you watch on YouTube or whatnot, you can see how their position is in sickbay. They are standing very, very far apart, a good 6 feet apart, just looking at each other and talking. And everything is coming up. Picard's like, "What the hell? Why didn't you tell me about Jack?" And Beverly goes on and gives her reasons for why she didn't tell him about their son. And as the conversation intensifies, that distance begins to decrease. They start standing closer and closer together, and it's a really nice, subtle visual of, they've been apart for 20 years. They haven't seen each other for 20 years, and so this sort of represents that physical in time, this physical distance represents that time distance, right? And as they begin to chat through their problems, the distance, like I said, gets less and less. Essentially what happens is Beverly's like, she wanted to tell Picard that she was pregnant. She wanted to tell him about that stuff, about Jack, but she was nervous to do so, because every time she got the courage to do that, Picard was always off on some sort of mission. His life was in jeopardy some way or another. I buy that. I buy that mostly. I mean, you look at the Next Generation, everyone's life is in danger. Every episode, more or less. And the films, again, it's high stakes. Picard is the center of the center of the danger, and they kind of roll with that theme. And so Beverly was like, "Look, telling, you are sort of, if the stars call you, you go to them. That is your thing. And she's like, I already lost Wesley to the Traveler, but like, who cares? But also, the funny thing is about her saying she lost Wesley to the stars. He was at Riker and Troy's wedding in was it Nemesis, where they, I think it's the beginning of Nemesis, where they got married. So I mean, he can come back anytime. Like, if he's not coming back, then he's just an a-hole. But then again, it is Wesley Crusher, and Wesley Crusher is, he's an annoying character. He is not one that I like at all. But anyways, that's her fear. Her fear was that she would tell Picard about their son. They would try and work it out, but then he would go off on some adventure and possibly die. And really, what she was, worried about was trying to keep Jack safe from that, right? She didn't know if she could kind of keep him out of harm's way, and that harm being, what could happen to his dad, what could happen to them as a family if they tried to work it out. um and yeah, so I quite like that. The other thing that was really good about this scene is that, like I said, by the end, they're finally close together. The walls and barriers are breaking down. But what's also really good about this scene is finally we get to see, and I say finally, we finally get a much more obvious discussion about Picard and Beverly's relationship. Now, Beverly was always meant to be a love interest for Picard. That was her role when she, you know, was brought on the show. That was meant to be the thing. And it's interesting because Gates McFadden speaks about this in her most recent podcast, where she chats with Kate Mulgrew, who plays Janeway. And she made some sort of comment. I think I'm remembering it correctly, where she said that Patrick Stewart thought, well, he's meant to be the hero of the show, so all the Kirk, he's meant to be smooching other ladies. He can't be tied down to one lady. And then of course you think about that clip in Extras. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. Sorry, I needed a drink. But yeah, so what was good about this scene is like I said, she was meant to be a love interest. We got little hints of romance scattered throughout TNG. They would have breakfast together every morning, and there was the really, I think it was in season 7, where they are sharing thoughts. And you're like, yeah, you really get a sense that there was a strong connection there, but they just never go with it in the show. And I do wish that they would have. It's one of my favorite relationships in Star Trek is Benjamin Sisko and Cassidy Yates. I love the back and forth with that relationship, especially when she gets in trouble and for I think she's does some smuggling for the Maquis or something like that, and it creates a complication for Sisko. But so I like that, and I wish, and it kind of humanizes these characters a little bit more, as opposed to you know, they have a different space lady in every port, as I guess as I guess Patrick Stewart wanted. Um, but yeah, so it was nice to finally get a scene like where uh, you could buy the fact that, oh yeah, these two were lovers, because I mean, if you look at the films, the TNG films, it's really not there at all. By the TNG films, they are very, very far apart, which is, I think kind of disappointing, given how great TNG ended. You would have hoped for a little bit more, I don't know, connection there. Um, what's next? Right. So during the course of the action, Shaw gets injured. There's a big. The ship gets hit. The bridge gets thrown around, and again, you're thinking, "Where's seatbelts? Where's seatbelts?" But it's okay, because that's Star Trek. You don't have seatbelts on the bridge. That'd be crazy. But he gets injured, and he needs to go to sick bay, and he transfers command of the Titan to Riker. Now, some people have thrown a fit about this, which I just find really silly. People are like, why is he giving command to Riker? There should be a third person because in context of the situation, Seven, who is the number one on the ship, she has been, because of her helping Picard and Riker and disregarding Shaw's orders, she has been confined to quarters and charged with insubordination, right? So whoever is beneath her, who that person hasn't shown their face. So I don't know if that's meant to be the doctor. I don't know if that's meant to be the engineer. I'm not sure who the third in command would be in this on the Titan at this time, but they're probably busy. They're probably busy. And also I'm fine with the fact that Shaw just gave command to Riker, because he's like, you got us into the situation. You get us out of the situation. He's pissed off. To me it made sense in that scene. Because I mean, the other thing is, I know that there's 500 people on the ship, but I'm also thinking, look, they just Riker and Picard jumped on the ship and said, "Hey, let's take it for a spin." And there's a part of me that's like, okay, do they actually have everybody on board then? Is every single character, or not characters, every single officer actually on the Titan, or were they doing this on sort of partial staff, or a few key members missing? To where it's like, that's another explanation as to why he gave the command to Riker. At least that's an explanation that I buy. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And so whatever the chain of command is, I'm fine with it. But there's a lot of people who seem to get really upset about about Shaw giving Riker the command of the Titan. But I mean, come on, guys and gals, or whatever. Is that not what you want? Like, you want to see either Riker or Picard in command of the starship. Like, and here's your chance. So I'm kind of like, of course they're going to do this. That's exactly what I want to see. I want to see Riker or Picard in command, not the whole time. They don't need to be in command the whole time, but this was Riker's old ship as well, and I think that's another thing. It's like, of course, yeah, it's Riker's old ship. Give him command for a second. Let's see how he takes over. Plus he's had a lot of experience, and there's also sort of a hint of inexperience with this particular crew. They haven't gotten into as many bonkers situations as, say, the Enterprise D had done, or E as well. So, again, it's like, yeah, these guys have way more seasons with bonkers stuff. Put them in charge. So I buy it. What can I say? I will say, if you're just tuning in, make sure to like and subscribe. I would appreciate that. I'm gonna have a drink of water. Okay, so Sean, I don't know. Tell me what you think. Either comment after the fact, or say something in the chat. Let me know what you thought about Shaw giving command to Riker. Was it a big deal to you? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Personally, I was fine with it. It was absolutely fine. It made total sense. It worked in the context of what was happening. Worf. We finally get some good scenes with Worf. I mean, to be fair, Worf's introductory scene was terrific. I think it was quite fun because there was all the backlash of the line in the trailer where Worf's like, "I prefer pacifism now," or something along those lines. And then this first scene that we get of Worf is of him just slaying people and lopping a Ferengi's head off. Now, there is the question of why is it okay for Worf to lop someone's head off, while it's not okay, while it becomes annoying when it was someone like Elnor in season 1 of Picard. I think it made sense for Worf to do. I was fine with Worf doing that, because if you go back and watch TNG and Deep Space Nine, he is killing a lot of people. Worf kills so many people. So, and he's always bloodthirsty. It's hilarious. It's so funny. He's always ready to fight and die and kill. It's just that's just Worf. So him doing that was fine. There could have been other ways of handling his introduction if they wanted to lean into the pacifism a bit more, like still make him a badass but not make him violent, or save the violence for later. But I liked it. I thought that was a good introduction. So it was fun. It was fun seeing Worf here in this scene. Raffi wakes up having been drugged in the previous episode, and wakes up, and Worf is on the ship with her. He's doing his Klingon movements and exercises, and she comes at him with a gun that he quickly disarms her, which is fun. And he does a long introduction about, my name is Worf, son of Moog, House of Martok, son of Erzenko, blah blah blah, son of Sergei, House of Erzenko, and ends the line with he's making does she take sugar in her chamomile tea, which is it's just a really fun Worf thing where I've always loved that Worf is so serious, and then will say things that he's also being very serious about, like, do you take sugar in your tea? But that's just come off the back of this long, list of his great accomplishments, from slaying Gowron to being the bane of the Duras family and all that stuff. And you're like, oh yeah, this is Worf. This is Worf. And I like his pairing with Raffi. I hold my hand up. I am enjoying this show, but I will also be honest about my criticisms as well. I've not really ever gelled with Raffi as a character. I've not never bought her sort of plights. They've never made much sense to me. She feels like a character who's been very poorly handled, I think, by the writers. So I think by pairing her with Worf is a much better way of letting us see this character progress and change and grow, because she hasn't really grown in from the first. She's just been angry. And yes, you could say, well, yeah, Worf was always angry. Well, he was angry, but there were moments of learning and slight changes throughout time, and he eventually becomes more relaxed in certain ways. Whereas in these, we've only had 3 seasons, and not many episodes, not had a lot of time to spend, not a lot of growth here. So I'm excited to see what happens between how this adventure and working together might have a positive influence on someone like Raffi. And it would be nice to see this character develop and become, less, I think, just less annoying. No offense to the actor, good actor, but just the character has always been just a little bit on the annoying side. And I think it's because it's very one note, and that's, unless you're someone like Data, who again appears to be one note but actually has a lot of growth. It's just one note characters frustrate me, and I want to see some growth. For example, in the first season, they introduced this weird plot line with her son, who she has one scene with, and then never goes back to him, and that never becomes a point of contention ever again. Despite, I think, in season 2 she's back working for Starfleet, and it's like, well, did you ever go back to your son? And then you find out in this season that she didn't. And I'm like, well, it's a bit lame that and that's what I mean. I there needs to be some growth and development and some hard choices. And I think we have seen a little bit of that with season 3, for example, when she's meeting with her husband in episode, I think, 1 or 2, and he's like, you need to, it's sure, I'll get you a meeting with the Ferengi, but as a result, or I'll get you a meeting with our son, you pick. And she picks a Ferengi. And so there's something with that. So I want to see that stuff developed. I want to see this character become a little bit more fleshed out, which is why I think we might not get much more of the bridge crew throughout this season because there are still principal characters. I mean, the principal cast of Picard has been reduced to 3 people: Picard, Seven, and Raffi. So hopefully, it would be nice to see something with some development with Raffi. I think that would be good. Um, so yeah, as I mentioned, the changelings are back, and holy heck, like that was exciting. That was something I was not expecting. And the thing is, I'm not actually sitting here watching this show trying to predict what's going to happen. I'm just watching it and enjoying it because it's been a terrific season of Star Trek, I think. And so there's this couple of moments that are just wonderful where uh 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 basically Shaw asks Jack while he's he's been injured and stuff, and he says, "How is she finding us? How is the Shrike? How is Vatic constantly finding them in this dust cloud where they shouldn't be able to find them, but for some reason they are?" And then Jack clocks with Jack. He's like, we're leaving a trail of breadcrumbs somehow. And so him and Seven pair up and find out that yes, the Titan is leaking some sort of gas that is making it possible for the Shrike to find them, and they're trying to stop that. And obviously, Seven goes off to do something while Jack is doing one thing, and then this guy, in the top picture of the guy with the yellow, um, comes in, and he starts kind of fighting Jack off. And when Jack punches him, the guy's face goes all jelly and golden, and I literally gasped when I saw that. I was like, "Holy shit!" I was like, "That's a changeling. That's a mother flipping changeling." Um, which again, like I said, came out of nowhere. And the thing is, I remember seeing somewhere, it might have been on Twitter or something like that, and I think it might have been. I might be misremembering. I saw it somewhere, or either it was a showrunner or someone else saying that this show ties up not only TNG but also ties up some Deep Space Nine stuff, and maybe something Voyager related. I can't remember, but there was a comment about Deep Space Nine, and this makes sense. To do something more with the changelings is exciting. I think they were they are probably my favorite villain in Star Trek. I think because the way that they were handled in Deep Space Nine, the gravitas of the gravity rather of their threat to the Federation and the Alpha Quadrant made them a much scarier threat to me than the Borg ever were, because the Borg are there. You see the Borg. Oh, okay, there's a Borg. This is what they want. When it's changed, like you just don't know. It's like they could be right in front of you. You never know, and that's what makes their threat, more frightening, I think. Um, so I like that they've come back because the rest of this episode, the rest of 17 seconds, I'm looking for changelings. Everyone I see, I'm like, is that a changeling? Is that a changeling? Is that a changeling? To the point where like I thought Riker was a changeling for a bit. I thought, I wonder if Riker's suddenly been replaced by a changeling. Like everybody. Um, and the other thing is they have made the changelings, they've always been kind of scary for sure. But they have made them. There's one particular moment that is quite horrific, I think. And by horrific, I mean in a kind of sci-fi horror sort of way. And it's this moment later on where Worf and Raffi track someone down because it's connected to the Ferengi Sneed and the selling of the breaking into Daystrom and all that kind of stuff and stealing that transporter technology. They you can see this on this bottom picture. They capture this guy and they interrogate him, and you think he's a druggie. You think he's on having withdrawals, but then it clicks with Worf, and he's like, "How long has it been, since you've been with the Link?" And you're like, "Oh gosh, there's another changeling. Shite." Um, and And there's just like he's the guy in the chair, the guy they're interrogating is like losing his mind because he needs to return to his gelatin state, his liquid state. Um and his voice gets all distorted and weird, and then Worf grabs him and tries to talk to him, but then he reverts to his jelly state. And the jelly state is really, I mean, you think about what it was like with Odo on Deep Space Nine. When the changelings went to their gooey state, it was this kind of golden, bright golden, almost kind of a nice color. But this, it's horrific. It's like the Blob. It's scary when they're in their gelatinous state, I think. But the big thing that they learn from this interrogation is that the stealing of the kind of transportation technology that was responsible for that big attack um, was only a misdirection. Something else has been stolen from Daystrom, and something bigger is coming, and that's essentially what Worf and Raffi are going to go off and do next. They are going to go and find out what else was stolen from Daystrom, what other threats are out there. Um, the other thing that was really fascinating that I liked about episode 2 was the conflict between Riker and Picard. The minute Riker assumes command, there's this moment where he has this grin, and you can tell that he's happy to be back in the captain's chair, to be back in control. And there's a wonderful role reversal where Picard is now number one and actually makes the joke, "I think you should call me number one now." And it's a fun dynamic, but the problem is you then begin to see these two characters clash. Riker is very much wanting to flee and get away. He doesn't want to fight. And Picard keeps saying, "No, we have to fight. There's no way out of this. We can't go deeper. Deeper into the cloud we go, the worse it is because there's a gravity well, and it will just pull them, pull them down." Um, but Riker just is being very stubborn about that. He doesn't want to fight, and it creates, like I said, creates a really fun dynamic between these two, because we're really not used to we've never really seen Riker talk down to Picard in this way. um and the other thing is it's not just the Shrike that Riker is trying to run from. Essentially Riker is running from the threat of death, uh, and that's because he has there's a deeper fear going on within him that he's struggling with, and it's quite intense because by the end of the episode, there's a point where the Titan just begins to sink into the gravity well. They didn't fight. They waited too long. Everything went wrong, and it essentially looks like they are going to their death. And then that's the end of episode 2. So I loved that. I love that episode. I thought it was a really exciting Star Trek episode. I love the dynamics that we were getting, because it felt real. It felt like, again, like I've said a million times before, I felt like I was actually seeing these characters again, but we're seeing them 20 years later. We're seeing a slightly changed, slightly more evolved version, and all of their headbutting makes sense. You've got the tension between Picard and Beverly. You got the tension between Riker and Picard, and then you have this new tension between Picard and Jack, and then you have the tension between between Shaw and everybody else, and these constant conflicting, everyone's conflicting wants and desires, all come together quite nicely in this episode, I think. Um, But then we get to the fourth episode, episode 4, which is called the no-win scenario. And again, the no-win scenario you think about if you know your Star Trek, you'll know it from Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, when Kirk says he doesn't believe in the no-win scenario, which is why he cheated on the Kobayashi Maru test. He didn't believe that he should have to face a no-win scenario. So what is the no-win scenario in this episode? I saw someone somewhere, I can't remember, it might have been Twitter, might have been on someone else's live stream, complaining and saying there was no win scenario. Well, there was a no win scenario, and there was sort of an external one, or the threat of a no win scenario, that being the Titan is sinking further and further into the gravity well. It will eventually crush them, but also inside this nebula and gravity well, there is this bursts of energy that have some sort of bio bio readings from them as well, that that could also destroy the Titan. So there's these two threats that the Titan are facing here, that are clearly, they serve the purpose of two no-win scenarios. Like, how we're dead in the water, we're sinking, no one's coming to help us, no one knows that we're here. How are we going to win? This is a no-win scenario. So there's one angle of it. It's all very hopeless, and a lot of, in some ways, Riker appears to have given up. He seems rather hopeless at the beginning of this episode. There's a moment with Shaw. He has a conversation with Seven, where they are discussing a particular plan. After she leaves the room, he's like, whatever. And it's because, they're all sort of resigned to the fact that we're all gonna die. So who cares what we do right now? But what was interesting is that I think in good Star Trek fashion, right? This whole episode is about that wonderful line, and it's a search for Spock, isn't it? When Kirk blows up the Enterprise, they're all down on Genesis, and Kirk's like, "My God, Bones, what have I done?" And he's like, "What you always do, turn death into a fighting chance to live." And that's essentially what becomes the main thrust of this episode. Is everyone is staring at death, and the thing to do is not to give into it, but to face it and fight to survive. Now, we've obviously learned in the first couple episodes that Riker, his son has died, and the reason we learn in this episode is why he came to help Picard and join him on this little quest, was to, he needed to get away from Troy. Her being Beta Z means she can read his thoughts and his feelings, and he's like, I haven't felt anything since my son died. Since he spoke about watching the coffin go into the grave, and looking into that black hole, that black abyss, and then here he is now. He's in a different black abyss, the gravity well. He ran away from his family to escape that sort of emptiness, only to find himself, once again facing emptiness, once again facing death, only this time his death and everyone on that ship's death. And his problem is that in his sort of jaded state, after dealing with his son, he has sort of lost hope of there being more to life. Saying that, in all their adventures, he's never seen anything that implies that there could be more once they die. Um, so I feel quite bad for Riker in this episode, and it's that's why he says to Picard, and you see it in all the trailers, he's like, this is the end, like we're going to die, and that's what he thinks, that's what he believes. Riker believes he is in a no-win scenario. Now, my only if I were to criticize something, if I were, which I'm about to, so I am. Like I said, these episodes have these flashbacks to the past. I do think when Riker was kind of talking about the death of his son, all that kind of stuff, I genuinely, maybe someone can correct me, because I didn't stick through all of I can't remember all of Picard season 1, and I know it wasn't in season 2. I don't remember when his son died. I think it feels like this is something that's happened off screen. I did a cursory search earlier, and I didn't see it. But yeah, I mean, most of the first 2 seasons are completely out of my brain, which is for the best. So yeah, so I don't remember if we actually saw that, or yeah. But I think what would have been nice is maybe to have, the old adage, show don't tell. In the flashback stuff that's kind of going on, it might have been nice to have maybe seen that early on, and get a sense of that's why Riker. I mean, it could have been something that was done in the first episode. Riker is he's just buried his son, and then Picard calls him, and he's like, I gotta go. You could have that could have been a thing. This is a minor criticism, very, very, very minor criticism. It's stuff that's easy to think of after the fact, but the way it is presented is absolutely fine. It's just another idea, so what's really so like I said, Star Trek 6 there's a lot of Star Trek 6 going on in this episode, while there's Wrath of Khan stuff going on as well. One of the big things, obviously, is that there's a saboteur on board. Sabotage. And in kind of classic Star Trek fashion, Seven is trying to find the saboteur. Speaking to Shaw, he's like, hey, if there's a changeling on board, they're gonna need a bucket. Of course, everyone on Twitter is like, why do all changelings have a Bajoran bucket? Who cares? That's why. Who cares? Just go with it. It's fine. It's fine. I saw people complaining about that. I'm like, if all the things to complain about, you're complaining about this, who cares? He can have a bucket. Let him have a bucket. But in the way Star Trek 6, they are looking for the magnetic boots that would have been used on the Chancellor's ship when the gravity was dismantled, and blah blah blah. So Seven is looking for the bucket, and you can see in the comparing shots where Scotty finds the boots behind this vent here. Seven finds the bucket behind a light panel, which is pretty cool. And yeah, this is her first real encounter with the changeling. Is quite scary. She's walking down the corridor, holding the bucket, because she needs it to. The idea is to use the bucket, the residual goo that's in the bucket. She's going to use to trace the changeling. It's on the ship. But she's walking down the corridor. Someone sees her, takes his gun, shoots the person that he's with, turns to Seven, shoots at her, incinerates the bucket. She shoots back, blows his arm off, and he has this terrifying, menacing face, and he charges at Seven. She shoots him a few more times, and he reverts back to his gelatinous state and like sinks into the cracks of the ship. And I swear, the way that the changelings move, it is so scary. It is like, it reminds me of the Blob. It's so scary and so like the movement just feels off. But here's a good example. If you can see the way this is the way these changelings look, and then if Odo here is a bit more gold. You can see where they're getting the idea, the sort of brownish gold, this white and dark. You can see it there. But yeah, it's a different kind of look for the changelings. I don't mind that. I think that's fine. I kind of like the big bright gold aspect of it. But also, it could be, are these changelings, do they look different in their gelatinous state for another reason? Is there something that makes them look like this when they're jelly like? Or is it just their new look? I don't know. We'll find out. Find out. But what was cool though is at one point when Worf was interrogating the other changeling, he he makes a passing reference to a good man, and he's referring to Odo. And saying that the changelings are back, I'm like, oh, it's a shame that Odo is no longer with us, because I would have. I feel like if he, if the actor was still alive, that he would be in this season. I do. And boy, do I wish. Odo was one of my favorite characters, and you know, it's wonderful seeing the changelings back, but it is a shame that we don't get to see Odo again. I think one of the other great shames in Star Trek history is that Deep Space Nine never got a film. Um, it should have. I would have happily sacrificed. What were they called? Insurrection and Nemesis. I would have happily sacrificed that for a Deep Space Nine film. I really would have. I mean, my goodness. It's not only, yeah. We've lost a good couple of a good number of Deep Space Nine actors in recent years, and it feels like a sad missed opportunity. It's disappointing. And Avery, like I said, Cisco is one of my favorite characters. Avery Brooks is a terrific actor, and I think not having he would have led a film brilliantly, and not getting that opportunity is uh, travesty. Travesty. So the other big moment in this episode was the Picard and Jack conversation, and it was really good. I found it really good. So, like I said, these episodes open with something in the past that ties into the present. In this particular episode, Picard he's at 10 Forward, Guinan's bar in L.A. At least I think it's in LA, maybe it's in San Francisco. I don't remember. Um, and some Starfleet students like, "Oh, tell us about your adventures." Like, he's poor Picard. He's sitting there with his fish and chips. He's about ready to tuck in all alone and have his meal, and then like 15 cadets or whatever just come and crowd around him and stand over him and demand that he tell them stories of the past, which is just quite fun. That was quite fun. But the point of that moment is Picard is basically telling them, things like, the crew is, working together is very important, blah 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 blah. Things that are very true. Like, you look back at, the TNG episodes, and yeah, it's all about teamwork and working together to accomplish their, the mutual goal of, whatever that is. um and ultimately for Picard, he gets to the point that, Starfleet was his family, and loved it. and always has. So it kind of sets up this beginning really sets up the theme of the episode, and that is sort of learning. You need to rely on each other. How important the crew is, and how important you are to each other. Um, with the ticking clock, Riker is like, Picard, we're gonna die. You better go get your affairs in order. Go meet your son. Go have a stinking conversation with him because we're all about to die, and you're never gonna get a chance to talk to him again. So they do. They go to the holodeck, and they go to the holodeck, and now okay, this is another minor gripe. So like, if anyone is watching this who worked on the show, which I doubt, but if you are, this is a minor gripe. This is like fanboy gripe. So this is I understand why we're in Guinan's bar. Logistically, I'm thinking it's a set that's already there, and so they're just going to keep using it because that's cost effective. That makes sense. Um, it's just that Picard goes into the bar and he's like, "This place is very dear to me." I'm like, "Is it? It's a bar, man. Like you barely went to the you barely went to 10 forward." And all 7 years of TNG, you barely went to 10 forward, except to, like, I don't know, watch a play or watch Data play his violin. Like, you never just hung out in 10 forward, Picard. So I found it funny that he was saying that this place is so important to him. I feel like if I not that if I were in charge, but if I could give an input, right, I would have been like, it makes more sense for Picard to take Jack somewhere that legitimately means something to him. Whether that is they go look at some horses. Picard was a horse guy, right? Maybe he takes him to, I don't know, some sort of, he's an archaeologist. He's into archaeology. Maybe he takes him somewhere where he found something or something special like that. That I think is what Picard would have done. I even would have bought him taking Jack on the Enterprise D, like walking the corridors of the Enterprise D or something like that. But um, Guinan's bar felt a little. It's like, it's probably not that special, but you know what? You need a bar. You want to be chatting over drinks. I understand that's why we're here. But that is one of my very minor gripes. Um, so yeah. The other thing that was funny is Jack does say, he's like, so the ship's like losing power, but this is all going, and again, I've seen people complain about this, but Picard says a line that the um the holodeck has its own power supply, and it's basically there for moments like this where everything is going to pieces, and people are like, they want to go they want to go, I don't know, live out their last moments doing something fun-ish, I guess. um but the other thing I was thinking about when he said that, I was like, you know what, that actually does make sense. It probably should have its own power supply. It probably should be something separate from the ship, because what that was the big problem with Moriarty, who is at some point turning up in this season. But Moriarty was able to, manipulate things from the holodeck, manipulate the ship from the holodeck. So it's like, yeah, no, but that actually, after the Moriarty situation, Starfleet probably thought, yeah, in case someone else decides to make a program that can beat Data, we should probably not have this stuff connected, in the way that we do, um, in case some crazy AI emerges. So yeah, I don't know. I bought that, but okay. The meat of this conversation. It's they're sitting at the bar, and Jack is a bit sort of shrugging the whole thing off. Um, and essentially at one point he turns to Picard and he's like, "Look, I don't need this. I'm fine on my own. I've always been on my own. That's just the way it is. But I don't need this. I don't need to have this conversation with you." And Picard, what he's got a sad expression on his face, and he's like, "Well, maybe I do." And I thought that was a really quite moving and bittersweet moment in that, these father and son are meeting for the first time, having their first real conversation together, sharing a drink for the first time together, and the son is like, "Pff, you never been in my life, I never wanted you in my life. um I don't really care to have this conversation." But then you have, the dad who is just full of regret. I mean, like when Picard was speaking to Beverly about it, he's like, what could have been? I could have been a father. I could have been maybe a husband. Implying that maybe he would have married Beverly. Um, he might not have continued down the dangerous path that he kind of always led with Starfleet, had he known. And it's a real shame. And you kind of, you really get a sense of Picard's sadness and the way it kind of clashes with Jack's sort of not flippantness, but is sort of, Jack is very closed off emotionally in this scene. Um, but the ice, they begin to, over the course of the conversation, they begin to sort of warm to each other. And there's a very good, very, very, very Picard line where he reminisces to a time where him and Jack Crusher, as in Beverly's first husband, were on a little adventure, and he speaks about how they had met some, quote, delightful ladies who were very, quote, enthusiastic. And so what you get is, over time, they start having kind of, it's father sons talking about girls, talking about adventures, starting to really bond. And you get a sense of that, and it's sweet. But then it all comes crashing down because of Shaw. um, Shaw finds his way into the holodeck and sits down at the bar and says, "Have I ever told you about the first time I met your dad?" And everyone's kind of like, "Oh, what's he gonna say? When did he meet Picard the first time? What was that like?" And then the bomb drops, and Shaw says it was the Battle of Wolf 359, which was the big battle in season 3, end of season 3. Maybe it was in the beginning of season 4, but the big battle when Picard was a Borg, and you know wreaking havoc. Had to take a drink. And so what you realize is Shaw is a bit like Cisco, in that he was on one of the ships that was under attack and was about to be destroyed, and he was a lieutenant came and chose him to get in a lifeboat. There was one lifeboat left, and not enough, too many seats, not enough seats. So someone had to choose, who was going to live and who was going to die, and he was chosen. And he's sort of, what you find is Shaw is living with this survivor's guilt. He's, why me? Why was I chosen to live and carry on, um, versus someone else? What made his life more special than someone else's? And again, it's like, it's a really intense scene. It's my favorite scene in this episode, and probably my favorite scene in the series so far. Just the way the monologue is delivered, and in a very restrained way. We don't have, I feel like if this was like season 2 or 1, there would be big flashy flashbacks to Wolf 359. We would see, the big explosions. Like, you think about what we saw a glimpse of it in the very first episode of Deep Space Nine, but that was, on a 90s budget. I could see the restraint not being held a couple of seasons ago, and just have full on immerse in that stuff. But they don't do that here, which I hugely appreciated, hugely. It was very restrained. Shaw is just giving this monologue, and you can see the pain in his eyes. You can see the confusion and the fear and the regret and the everything is on his face. It's wonderfully a wonderful wonderful scene. And then you finally you understand why he was so cold to Picard at the very beginning, and says that harsh line where he's like, former ex Borg, um, and everyone in the room's like, "Geez, where did that come from?" It all comes from this. And what's fascinating is this monologue scene is very reminiscent of something. And if you haven't figured this out yet, Shaw is in some ways a bit like Quint in Jaws. He's a bit like that captain. It's no coincidence that the actor who played Quint in Jaws is named Robert Shaw, and the captain in Picard 3 is Liam Shaw. There are similarities. There are similarities there, and this particular monologue was heavily inspired by Quint's Indianapolis monologue. Where if you've ever seen Jaws, which I'm assuming anyone watching this has seen Jaws, but there's that moment where Quint talks about being on the USS Indianapolis and it being sunk and being left in the water, and the sharks coming and starting to eat people, and and it's very, you get a sense of why he is the way he is, why he is so crazy and kind of facing death and going after sharks and all that kind of stuff. And so you get that is clearly an homage here with Shaw, where he's talking about his Borg experience, directly related to that. um and I mean, at some point there's some just terrific lines in this. Shaw was just not holding back. And at one point he says something along the lines like, "Forget that weird shit on the Stargazer. The real Borg are still out there." And that to me was a really funny line. Funny, not in a ha way, but funny in that season 2 of Picard, the Borg storyline made no effing sense. It's just none. No sense did that make. Because if Gerardi was the Borg, this Ultra Borg queen 400 years ago, why was the Borg even bad in the first place? It didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. So it was funny to me that there's this line that says, "Forget that stuff. The real Borg are still out there. They're not the real Borg." Um, that was fascinating to me. Look, I might be reading more into that line than what's there, but my takeaway was that was a subtle, like, please forget that. Please don't hold that against us if we do something with the Borg later on. Um, and the other thing that was another really kind of smacking line, is that Shaw's like, the only Borg. He's Picard was a Borg who was so deadly that they actually gave him a name. And at that point, Jack actually steps in. And he's like, "Hey, leave." It's interesting. He's like, He's kind of saying, "Leave my dad alone. What you're doing is mean and hurtful." But then Picard, again, if this was, I feel like if this was like season 1 or 2, he would have had a damn speech. He would have had a speech. He would have, but he doesn't. He doesn't have anything to say. Picard just looks at Shaw, sees the pain, and he's like, "No, it's fine. I understand." And he leaves. And it's such like this whole scene, the way it sets up with Jack and Picard, and then he's trying to connect with his son, and his son doesn't really want to connect with him. The whole episode is trying to get about, land on, themes of connection and fathers and sons, and Riker is, you know he's lost his connection with his son. He's lost his son. Picard has a chance to connect with his son, but his son doesn't want to connect with him. The crew is they're struggling to connect because Shaw is pushing off Seven. He's angry at Riker and Picard, rightfully so, for what they've done. So there's all this stuff happening. It all sort of culminates in this wonderful bar scene. That it was, to me, it was like, that was just literally one of my favorite scenes in the series so far. It will be hard to beat that, but you never know. There's a lot more to come. There's a lot more to come. So yeah, that was the hats off that. But the other thing is we very rarely get to see people who have been negatively impacted by Picard's time as Locutus, as a Borg. We did see it in Deep Space Nine season 1. I mean, Cisco was not having it. He was not happy with Picard. He was not interested in anything he had to say. He was angry. He was bitter. He wasn't sure if he wanted to stay in Starfleet. He didn't want to listen to. It was, and when the penny drops for Picard that he was also at Wolf 359, Picard acts in a similar way. He's like, oh, I there's nothing he can do, and the pain that these people feel is justified, and he can't argue with it. He can't talk his way out of it. There's nothing other than just accept the fact that some people are going to hate him because of the experience that they've been through. So I love that. I like that we're getting, this aspect of Shaw. It in some ways, I think it tames him a little bit. It's like, oh, okay, right, he's not just an a-hole. He's like this for a reason. He is, he wants his order. He wants things done efficiently, and he doesn't want any of this other nonsense. Of course, it raises the big question: why does he have Seven on the ship? A former Borg. Why does he want her there? What is he gaining from her? Is it that he recognizes that she's a more than competent first officer, which I think he is? Is it that he's also trying to confront his feelings about the Borg, and or former Borg, to try and maybe not see anyone with that sort of connection as bad? Don't know. But it's interesting. It adds more layers to him that I think is terrific. And Shaw has grown on me quickly. I'm like, yeah, he's a cool dude. He's got his problems. I like him. He's a good captain. I'm glad that he's become. I'm glad that he's more of a Jellicoe, as I was saying in episodes 1, in my discussion on episodes 1 and 2, where Jellicoe was a bit of an a-hole, but his methods worked perfectly fine. And also, kind of after this stuff, there's some very big TNG moments. And I think if you were to compare this episode to a TNG episode, I would be tempted to compare it to the Booby Trap. The Booby Trap is one where they find an old ship that Picard is like going crazy over because of archaeological reasons and historical reasons, and it's in the center of this asteroid field. And once they're in there, they're kind of trapped there. They can't really use the engines of the ship. Blah, 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 blah. And there's kind of it's kind of a similar theme with this, in that they are trapped in this gravity well. It's going to destroy them. They will probably die. Blah 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 blah. So it's all about it's all about trying to use your mind to come up with a clever way to get out of this situation. And Beverly is the one who initially gets it. She realizes that the pulses that are happening every once in a while, these energy pulses, are contractions, as in like something is about to give birth, some sort of space creature. They're basically in some sort of space womb, and there's about to be a birth. And then you have your first big not big, but your first kind of conference room discussion. It's like, oh yeah, we're back. We're back to Star Trek Next Generation, where they sit around a table and they discuss their options and they find the best way forward. And then it's like, let's go. And I love that. I love the fact that they're the kind of principal cast that of TNG are all here plus Jack, and running through the scenario that Beverly has come up with, and or Jack and all them have come up with, and that is, when the next wave comes, let's speed up, ride it out, and use the energy to charge the ship and jump into warp. Right? Made sense. Really good stuff. But Riker's still sort of like, no, I don't want to do it. We're not going to win. It's too dangerous. And it becomes a point of like, look, we're going to die either way. So we either let the gravity well kill us, or we try this. And if we succeed, we actually get to live. And he's like, fine. So they go about and do it. As a result of this, Shaw and Seven share a scene together, and they're both working in engineering, trying to jerry rig some hot wire, some stuff to kind of open the warp nacelles. And it's a what's so great about this episode is everything starts off with everyone being kind of tense with each other and unhappy and disliking one another in some way. There's some sort of tension between most of the principal characters in this. But then by the end, everyone is forced to confront their issues in some way. Whether that's Picard and Beverly confronting their stuff, Riker and Picard confronting, the issues of death and no win scenario, and Shaw confronting Picard and having to learn to connect with Seven. And I think that moment between Shaw and Seven, when they're working in engineering together, thinking along the same lines of what needs to be done, was a really good moment. And Shaw paid her some compliments that began to it allowed you to see that, okay, he's not a total a-hole. He clearly sees what Seven can bring to the table. Her sort of she has some sort of merit, right? There's something, and he recognizes that, and he can see her value. He just needs to get past the Borgness, and he's starting. I think to kind of get there, because by the end, yeah, they are able to do what they need to do with the ship. They're able to ride the wave out. And there's this moment on the bridge where Jack is he's the odd man out in this, where he's looking at everyone and he's seeing the connection. He's seeing Shaw and Seven smiling at each other. He's seeing, Picard and Riker and all them happy that they have succeeded. He's seeing the bridge crew, complimenting each other. And he's the sort of odd man out in this moment, where he's seeing the big connection happening. And it's a really good sort of cap off to the first act of this show. But I have a couple of things to say. So yeah, so the before they are swept up in the wave, there's some clear references to the booby trap, as I mentioned, where they have to sort of maneuver their way through asteroids, and that's essentially what happens in the booby trap. The Picard has to maneuver the Enterprise D on sort of I think it's just on like inertia or something like that. He has to sort of he can't use the engines properly, so he just sort of swings the ship around and gets it out of the situation, which is what happens in this. Pretty good. Um, and then of course they ride the wave out, and there's this really the kind of the big reveal at the end is the new life, to seek out new life, and essentially they're like more space jellyfish, which is a really fascinating reference to the encounter at Farpoint, the kind of space jellyfish that kind of encapsulates the big not the threat, but the big reveal in Encounter at Farpoint. So it's funny that we have that they do that again. Now it's these the space jellyfish are not the same, but the thing is, it's really it's weird because like you think, oh, space jellyfish, how silly, but the moment is really quite, again, it's another sweet moving moment. It's this moment of new life, this moment of birth that after experiencing so much threat of death and destruction just comes across as quite sweet, I think. That's maybe the best word that I can come up with for that. It was seeing the crew react to this new life and real understanding what they were just in and now they're out of was wonderful. I thought it was a really really good scene. Um and there's also, the other thing is there's other sort of references in this. The first act of this show is, like I said, it's very, very, very Wrath of Connie. And you can see here it's a couple the two ships battling it out in a nebula. The You can almost say that the in Picard 3, the energy pulses and the gravity well, this are the Genesis countdown. When Khan triggers Genesis and it's going to explode. There's the time sensitive pressure of the Enterprise needs to get its warp engines going. Spock goes and sacrifices himself to get it working, and there's kind of death and rebirth happening in that moment. And it's a similar kind of thing here. We have the countdown, you have the threat of death, you need to get the warp speed going. They get out just in time, before everything goes to bits. But it's a terrific ending to the first act. I think what's quite fun is we've set up a lot of stuff. We've the changelings are back. Vadic is an interesting new villain, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see her again. I do not believe that she is gone. There's a moment where right as the Titan is getting out of the asteroid belt, where they clash with the Shrike one more time, but Riker has in the way that Vadic uses her big weapon to throw Beverly's ship at the Titan. Riker uses the tractor beam to hurl an asteroid at the Shrike and is able to get away from them that way. Which it was fun. I'm fine with it. It was it's a bit maybe on the kind of the silly absurd action side, but like it was really fun and quite satisfying to see the big asteroid just bash into her ship and ruin everything. But we don't know if they survived the aftermath of the birth, but I'm pretty sure they do. Pretty sure they do. But there's a lot of really good stuff in this first half. There's the ending is very interesting for two reasons. One, you have a classic TNG thing, and that you have Picard doing an admiral's log, summarizing everything. Who is this Vadic? What do they want with Jack? What is the bigger threat? There's more coming, end of the log kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, it's been so long since we've had something like that. I love those bits in TNG. And yes, most of the captain's log stuff is just there to be exposition to really quickly catch the audience up with what's going on. And I think using it at the end of this episode to summarize what's happened and where we're going next was super clever, very well done. Um, the no win scenario is by far the best episode of the lot, and I think there's a lot more exciting stuff to come. Um, but yeah, um, there was two big moments that were pretty cool at the end here. Um, well, close to the end. One thing I want to say about Vatic is there's a scene quite early on that I didn't mention where she jumps off her chair, goes to the back of her ship, and slices her hand off into a tray. And the hand levitates and molds into a alien looking face. Like if you think of like the typical way we think of aliens, it kind of molds into that kind of creepy face. And what was fascinating about that scene is so far we'd only seen Vatic be a bit OTT with her acting. Not her acting, but her character is very like dramatic. But it's wonderful. Here there is a stark difference. You can see she's afraid. The face that is talking to her is basically says, "Go into that nebula. You go and find Jack Crusher and you bring him." And she's like, "It's a suicide mission. I can't do that." He's like, "You don't matter. Your people don't matter." And this is where I'm almost positive I've heard people say on Twitter. I want to say it might have been on Terry Metalis' Twitter. I don't know. I don't remember. That she is a changeling. But the fact that this changeling head says to her, "Your people don't matter," made me go, wait a minute. Is she really a changeling, or is she something else? Is she something else? I don't know. I'm curious to find out if she really is a changeling or if she isn't. Because the other thing that's interesting to me is why are the other crew members, why do they continue to, they're in a very bizarre form. Why are they in that form? Why are they just in standard changeling appearance? Why do they need to be looking like those bird people? It's I'm very curious to see what these connections are, if she really is or isn't, or adjacent. I'm fascinated because it was such a bizarre thing. It's something we've never seen before. Like she cuts her hand off, it becomes a changeling's head, and there's some sort of communication, and it's like it's just some sort of like connection to this terrorist link, this the bad link, or what is it? What is it? So I'm fascinated. I'm curious to know what that's about. And then the other big moment at the end is of course with Jack Crusher. Um, in the third episode, he has this sort of vision thing where he sees these weird red roots growing on the wall. He sees them again at the end of this episode, but then he has this really intense vision of explosions of red clouds looks like a city being wiped out, almost in sort of like a Terminator 2 fashion, where you see like a big atomic bomb blowing up a city, wiping it away. And he's smacking his head. And there's all these voices going on. Repeated a lot is the phrase "find me." It's said from a woman says it a few times, a man says it. There's a child screaming. I no idea what it is. No idea what in the world is coming with that. I don't know if it's like, is he seeing Romulus blowing up? Is he seeing Earth blowing up? What is it? I don't know, but it's a wonderful little nugget at the end of this first act to be like, okay, we've had this big adventure where we've gone and we've saved Beverly. We've saved Beverly and we've saved Jack, and we've had a conflict with a villain that we've managed to escape. Um, we'll also witness the birth of this alien life, right? It's a wonderful, quite self-contained story in these 4 episodes, but it's there's still more story to come. And I think I saw somewhere, I can't remember, if it was like the New York Times or something like that. There's a lot of stuff I can't remember where it's from, but I remember reading it where someone was complaining about how the first few episodes of the season basically sort of kind of drip feed the plot. You don't really get a sense of who the big baddie is, but like I think that's total bullcrap. Like, this was great. Like, these first 4 episodes, I think, were handled really well. My criticisms would be minuscule if I were to say, go back and talk about how to maybe reshape episodes 1 and 2. But like, no, the pattern, the way things flowed was wonderful, and I think this is a really good block of episodes, and concludes the first act of the story. And it's an interesting way of storytelling as well for television, because streaming is interesting. The way streaming works, the way streaming narratives work, there's always the kind of the episodic is gone, and it has to be this one big arc sort of situation. So the fact that this is trying to balance, like, okay, here's act 1 in 4 episodes that concludes some stuff, but is breadcrumbing and leaving trails for future, for the next phase of the adventure. And then, of course, I think the next block, if I was told, is kind of 5 to, I don't know, 5 to 8 or something like that, and then 9 and 10 are is the finale, is the third act. um so it's an interesting way of writing to the streaming model, the sort of you have, the big arc. um because episode 4 left me feeling satisfied, like, "Oh, okay, we've reached a turning point, a good turning point, a good bit of conclusion." And it's like, "Pff, let's hit the next phase. Let's hit the next phase and see what happens." But yeah, I have to say, I mean, Picard season 3 is crushing it. It is terrific. I think there's some people out there who just, regardless of the quality, are just going to hate it out of ignorant principle or something like that. Um, and I've never understood that. I've always, you know, there are things about, new Trek that I don't like. It's very easy for me to just not worry about the inconsistencies that happen with, Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Um, we all have our own sort of headcanon, and I just tell myself that those take place in another universe, a la the JJ verse, and that, to me, that's absolutely fine. Um, and there is a real sense of Picard season 3 really not paying much attention to seasons 1 and 2, which helps it out immensely. It is the way it has returned to formula, and there's some people. Someone told me recently they couldn't reconcile these characters with those from TNG. That they had, they bought people changing over time, but said that they've changed too much. Um, I would have agreed with that with seasons 1 and 2, but with season 3, I don't. When I see Riker, I'm like, yeah, this is Riker. I mean, it's just like how Riker was acting, not just like how, but when you think about the Best of Both Worlds, no, not the Best of Both Worlds, the All Good Things, where you jump into the future and, Riker is seasoned, but he's very bitter. He's very bitter in that future, which obviously isn't the future that we're in, because that's an alternative future. Um, but they've carried over certain elements. And Riker isn't bitter about the death of Troy, but he is conflicted about the death of his son, and that's caused problems. And I buy that. I the way he was acting was like Riker. I was like, no, I see this as Riker from TNG, who's older and going through some serious family trauma. And I bought that. Beverly as well. The way eh, she was great. She's acting like I would imagine Beverly to act. Her being quick to clock what the energy pulses were, and you know using her genius to work it out and what they needed. I bought it. There was nothing that these people were doing that were out of line. Now, I will jokingly talk about the cursing um, as my last point. There's a lot of people complaining on the old social media about Picard dropping the F bomb. Um, I am of two minds about it. Um, on one level, I sort of get why people complained, and there's an interview in Collider that has showrunner Terry Matalas talks about it, and he too says he was conflicted about it, but ultimately thought it felt right and kept it in. Fine. An improvisation that Patrick Stewart did, and there you go. And it was kept in. I guess they thought it felt natural and fine. Um, but I guess the problem is the problem that people have, I guess, is that when you think of classic Star Trek, it wasn't on streaming. It was on, you know, basic television, accessible to everybody. And those shows, you weren't allowed to cuss at that time. There's a lot. I mean, you still can't say certain words, right? So Star Trek's always had that problem, in that they weren't really able to curse, and we've all sort of gotten used to the fact that, okay, well, in Star Trek, people don't really drop the F bomb or things like that. We've evolved beyond cursing or something like that. Um, and obviously, with some of the new stuff, they like to drop the F bomb, things like that. Now, I think about when I was a kid, if there was a show, or I guess it would be a film, like an R-rated film like RoboCop or Terminator or something like that, I would not have been able to I would not have been allowed to watch that because of the cursing. Yes, I could watch it on TV because the cursing would have been edited out, obviously, most of the time awkwardly. You know, and so I get that. Star Trek is ultimately a kids show. It's not just for kids, but it's kind of all ages, but it is meant to be enjoyed by kids of all ages. And if they're saying certain words, like the F word, I understand the apprehension there. And you want you want as you think about you growing up and watching Star Trek and loving it, and wanting to pass it on to your kids. There will then be a sort of conflict. Well, okay, they do drop some stronger language in this one, but how what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Is it bad? Is it good? Does it fit? There has been cursing in Star Trek, and sometimes they do the more colorful language in alien speak, so it's not technically cursing. So there's a lot of people angry, not angry, but sort of frustrated about that aspect. And I think I understand the conflict, but I don't. Yeah, I understand the conflict, but I'm not sure if it's that that big of a deal. I guess I don't know. I don't know. maybe because I don't have to worry about it, I don't mind it as much. Because when Shaw drops a couple of curses along the way, and I'm like, that was funny. Calls himself a dipshit from Chicago. I'm like, that was good. I like that. And then Picard reuses that on him later, and that was a good reversal of that, and I enjoyed it. Um, but yeah, so it's a complicated it's complicated. It's definitely complicated. But hey, what can I say? That's all I got. That's all I got. Episodes 3 and 4, 17 seconds and no win scenario were terrific. I will be back another podcast in the next week. I think next Thursday. I think I'm back on Thursday instead of Wednesday. Wednesday is my generally the day that I do these shows is on Wednesday, but the Star Trek shows are special, and I tend to do them on a weekend day. But I'll be back next Wednesday, bringing on author Jonathan Whitelaw again. We're going to be discussing the first 3 episodes, I guess, of The Mandalorian, and that's going to be entertaining. I don't know if you guys have seen anything of The Mandalorian yet, or if that's something you're into, but yeah, I am looking forward to discussing that show because I have opinions in the way that I'm very positive about Star Trek Picard season 3. It's the inverse of that with The Mandalorian season. Was it season 3? I think it's season 3. Yeah, I nothing happens in those first 2 episodes. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm gonna save the rest for next week. But yeah. But yeah. So I'll be back. I'll be back next week, and I will I'll wait another 2 or 3 more episodes of Picard before I come back and do another Picard breakdown of how I feel the season is getting on. And what can I say? It's getting on great. It's getting on great right now. So there we go. Well, enjoy your weekend, and we will I will catch you guys later.